Forged carbon fiber? On a Sonex? Oh yeah. Alright, well let's start by talking about the problem we want to solve. This is my wing end rib, and if this was vertical we wouldn't have to do what we're doing today. But the end of the wing is actually set at a 45-degree angle here. So if I put my wingtip light into place here and tip this at 45 degrees, that also tips the wingtip light at 45 degrees, which means that it doesn't shine directly upwards, which is a no-no. So what I need to do is build a part that'll offset this by 45 degrees. Now I sort of already fixed this with a 3D printed part, this little standoff here, which would go onto the wingtip, which would be sloping down that direction, and then my wingtip light would be standing straight up. Or maybe you heard about the recent accident where somebody had used a 3D printed part for an intake on their aircraft, and it got me thinking there's probably going to be some parts where I need to try and build something that is not going to melt. But it got me thinking it's probably a good idea to kind of learn some other method of building parts that aren't susceptible to heat and fatigue the way that a 3D printed part would be. And I thought to myself, well, this seems like a really good place to kind of cut my teeth on a new process here. I've never done any composites work before. So I decided I was going to try and make this part out of carbon fiber instead of 3D printed plastic. So here's my first attempt. I 3D printed a mold that I could create this carbon fiber part in. It's actually a two-piece mold, so there's a cavity and a core. And essentially I would fill this lower portion here up with some carbon fiber, and I would do the same thing on the core here and kind of fill around the edges here. And then the two parts go together and you kind of squeeze out the carbon fiber and the resin that are inside, and then clamp it together, and 24 hours later theoretically you should be able to pull out a working piece that would suit what you need. This is what's left of my first set of molds here. I was using an incorrect release agent that actually did not work very well at all. I'm not sure exactly why it didn't. I think that it probably just didn't coat the plastic as well as it should have, and the resin actually ended up sticking to this. I was able to get the part out, but I ended up having to bust up my molds a lot. And as I was looking at this, I thought there's a couple things I can do to fix this. Number one, I can use a different mold release. And secondly, I decided to go ahead and make these walls a little bit thinner. It's kind of a pretty heavy part. It's probably, I think it's actually a little bit heavier than the 3D printed part would be. And so I went ahead and made the walls thinner than this one in my new design, and I also made the draft a little bit steeper. So I think that this one was a 6 degree draft, and on the new one's a 12 degree draft. If you're not sure what a draft is, if you look at this, you'll notice that this lower portion here, let's say this is at 0 degrees, and going up this direction here would be 90. But with the draft, it actually is an obtuse angle here, so it's a little bit more than 90 degrees. In this case, it's 102 degrees because it's a 12 degree draft, whereas the old one was only 95 degrees. So it should make the part come out easier. All right, so this is my newest mold here, and I did actually make a part that came out without any issues. I did change the process for release agent. After talking to a friend at my EAA chapter who works in composites a lot, he suggested using some wax, doing 5 coats of it. So I got this part release paste here. It's a wax-based paste that you spread. He suggested 5 coats on both your core and your cavity here. And then he also suggested adding some PVA over the top of that. And PVA is a water-soluble plastic, essentially. So you put a thin coat of this over the top of your wax. And then when the part comes out, it actually will pull some of that PVA as well. And it also disallows the resin from sitting in on your mold here as well. So this is the part that came out of it. Obviously, I didn't do a very good job of packing this one. You can see there's kind of an open cavity here where I didn't fill it as well as I should, and a little bit back here on the back side as well. Just sort of right up in here. But the good news is that I was able to remove the part without any damage to my molds, which means that I can make more than one without, ending up with a destroyed 3D printed mold. Now these molds take about 12 hours a piece, so 12 hours for the core, 12 hours for the, actually I think it's a little bit more for the core. It ended up being, I think, like 13 hours for the core and like an 11 and a half or something like that for the cavity here. So obviously you don't want to print these more than once if you can help it, and that way if you have sort of a misfilled part like this, you could just pull it out and redo it. Alright, so this one is the one for the right wing. I've also printed off another set of molds here for the left wing because they go the opposite direction. The first step is to sand down your mold to get kind of all the layer lines from the 3D printing out of there. Another option might be to print it standing up like this so that your layer lines go this direction, so it theoretically should make it easier to pull out as you don't have grooves that you're fighting against. I've put a big enough draft on here that it doesn't really make too much of a difference. But anyway, the first step is to sand this down so that there aren't any of those lines or as few of them as possible, to smooth this out as much as you can. So this one I've kind of already sanded. I'll probably do a little more sanding on this. The core, on the other hand, has not been sanded yet, so I'll go ahead and do that now. So what I found works really well is these 400 grit sandpaper pads. They're meant for, it's wet dry. You can use it to sand before painting and that kind of thing. But it works really well to get inside of the parts here and sand them out. And then there's also some tighter spots where I just use a little piece of emery cloth. This is also 400 grit to kind of get in there and, kind of up in this back corner back here. Getting a little emery cloth back there works a little better than getting this padding back in there. Alright, so that's significantly smoother than it was when I started. It also doesn't hurt to sand around this outside on the flat areas here because regardless of what you do, some of the material is going to squish out when you squeeze these two things together, and getting rid of those ridges will help it to become dislodged much more easily as well. Yeah, looks pretty good. Alright, we'll go ahead and work on the core here a little bit too. Alright, well I've sanded down both of these mold halves here. They're much more smooth than they were previously, so the part should be ejected pretty easily. The next step is to throw on a couple of layers of this wax. It's pretty much the same as like car wax. In fact, you might even be able to just get a tub of turtle wax and do the same thing. This is actually designed as a mold release agent, so it's probably better than using turtle wax or whatever, but it's kind of the same process. You just grab a t-shirt, an old t-shirt, grab a little bit out of the container here, and then just a thin coat over the top on both sides, and then let it dry, and then you put on another coat, let it dry. It takes about 10-15 minutes to dry. I found that using my wife's hair dryer would actually speed up the process a little bit. Between coats, you can do that if you want, or you can just wait. As long as it's relatively warm where you're working, it dries out pretty quickly. Got a bunch on the lid here I can use. Just get a little bit, a dab on your t-shirt here. And we'll start putting a nice little layer of it on there. The idea of the wax is to help fill in some of these grooves that you didn't get to with the sandpaper, and also it just is easier to release, kind of protects the resin from getting into the plastic and adhering to it. Like I said, I like to put the wax around the outside as well, just because inevitably some of the resin will drip out and sort of leak out of the mold, and when it does, it kind of gets stuck to the side instead, and it could cause some damage trying to get it apart. Down inside of this small corner down here, you can see I got kind of a pool of it. You don't want it to really pool up too deep, so if you can get in there and kind of scrape some of it out, that's probably a good idea. But you do want to make sure everything's covered also. Okay, I'm going to call that one coat. Move on to the core here. I'm going to make sure every single surface gets coated here. I've put some holes in both of the halves of this mold here as well. If I had screws that were long enough, I could actually use that to bolt it together. What I found actually works pretty well is to just use some carpenter clamps, clamp it together, and have a couple of bolts. I think I have, I don't know, M5 screws, I can't remember what size I got, that fit in here, and just put it in just enough to be able to kind of hold everything aligned, and then the clamps, it doesn't slide around once you have that done. Alright, so I've got my two molds with several layers. I think I did 4 or 5. I got to the point where it kind of felt like it was sort of waxy across the whole thing, and actually waxed up my my secondary ones here. These are the ones that I had already pulled a part out of, so I've gone ahead and re-waxed those, and I've set them here in front of this heater to sort of get them to dry out a little quicker, maybe. Maybe not, we'll see. But I'll probably put another coat on these before I'm done. These other ones, the first one that I did, I think it's ready to go. So I'm going to start putting on the PVA coating, polyvinyl alcohol. It's a water-based plastic, essentially, that it goes on. It's liquid. I don't know if you can see it's liquid in there. So I'm going to put a thin coat over the top of the wax and let that dry as well. And may even do a second coat just to sort of seal the wax from the resin that we're going to put in it later on. The instructions say to use a fine mist for this PVA. I tried using a spray bottle and it didn't work very well. What I found worked better is just a cheap paintbrush. I bought, I think, a box of, I don't know, 30 or 50 of these for a couple of bucks on Amazon. And so what I'm doing is I'm just putting a light layer of this over the top of every part that I had just put the wax on to make sure that it stays in place. I'm going to get this into every nook and cranny inside of here as well. And that includes outside of the mold here, so kind of these outside edges here. Again, some of the material will creep out when I put the mold together, so I'm going to coat everything with wax and this PVA. Alright, well, I've got 2 coats of PVA over the top of 4 or 5 coats of wax here. I'm just going to go ahead and let this dry. I've put it up in front of the heater to help it dry a little bit quicker anyway, but I'm just going to let it sit for a little bit longer on its own to sort of cure. So the next step will be to mix up some resin and to add some chopped carbon fiber at a certain amount, and add it into these molds and put them together and let them dry overnight. Alright, so I've gone ahead and let this dry for a bit. It's probably been about an hour since I went inside, grabbed some lunch. So the PVA is all dried on here now. It's a nice thin coat. There's no runs or anything like that, and as it should be. It should be just a really nice thin coat and dried before you go on to the next step here. So the next step then is to start putting together the resin and the carbon fiber in correct proportions. Now, because I designed this part in solid edge, I'm able to extract from that the amount of volume in the part from the cavity minus the core that goes into it. So the amount of space between the cavity wall here and the core wall here, all the way around, I know what the volume should be. And that volume, I've got it put out here on my GitHub site. So that volume is 31.343 cubic centimeters. And so doing some math, I've described that down here. Basically, if you multiply that that volume, if you multiply that by 1.5 grams of carbon fiber and resin by weight for each cubic centimeter, that ends up coming out to 35.358 grams of carbon fiber and resin. And of that total, we want to use 60% of that weight should be carbon fiber and 40% of that weight should be the resin. And so there's some calculations here to kind of tell you how much of each you want to use, broken down by 60 and 40%. But that number is listed up here. So what we want is 21.2 grams of carbon fiber. I'm going to go ahead and round that up to 22 just to make sure that I've got enough. And then it's 14.2 grams of resin. So again, I'll just round that up to 15. And then I've got a nice low weight scale here that I can use, where I'll put in some resin and the hardener, mix it together in the correct proportions. And then I also need to have, like I said, 21.2 grams, or I'd probably end up rounding that up to, 22, I guess, grams of carbon fiber in another cup. One thing is, though, you got to be careful with this resin. It definitely gets on everything. I bought this scale new. It was pretty cheap. I think I paid less than $10 for it on Amazon, but I've spilled resin on it a couple of times as I've been trying to do this project. It's a good idea to have like some kind of a, something to protect it from getting resin all over it, which is what this kind of tray thing here is for. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and start measuring out the carbon fiber first, make sure that I've got enough of that, and then I'll do the resin afterwards so that I don't have to kind of fight between the two. And what I found works really well, what some people suggest doing is, painting some of the resin, using a paintbrush and painting some of the resin onto the walls here, adding carbon fiber, and then, soaking it again. What I found works really well is to mix up your resin really well, and then take the amount of carbon fiber that you have and just kind of shove it into it, and just make sure it's like a, you're just squishing the resin throughout the carbon fiber, and you just kind of make a ball of it, and then pull it apart and put it in here afterwards, so it's already soaked and it's already ready to go. So that's what I'll be doing. This is a step where you definitely want to use gloves. This stuff's going to get everywhere. You're going to end up wiping it on yourself probably. So have an extra, have a pair on your hands, and then I've got an extra pair here at the ready, because inevitably I end up getting it on my hands because I peel off my gloves because they're a big mess, and then I go and touch something, I'm like, I forgot to put gloves on. So definitely have an extra pair on the side and be ready to throw them on real quick. All right, so I've got my carbon fiber chop material here. I'm going to go ahead and open this bag. Get these things out of the way here for now. I'll just do one at a time. So I'll turn on my scale. This scale automatically tears to 0 when you turn it on. If I were to take the cup out, I don't know if you're going to be able to see this or not, but if I put the cup in there, remove the tray, it goes up to 26 grams, negative 26 grams. I put it back on, it goes back to 0. Definitely want to make sure that the scale is, if you have too many pieces of this craft paper underneath, it'll actually suspend the bottom of the scale and you won't get a good reading, so make sure it's flat. And yeah, so we need to have 22 grams of carbon fiber. All right, so that's 6 grams. Alright, I'll just put this off to the side, make sure I've got all of my material in this cup where it belongs. I'm going to shut this thing off because it has a short timer on it. And I've actually had it turn off halfway through measuring out the amount of resin and hardener that I need. So the best way to do this, in my opinion, is to kind of measure them out separately into 2 different cups and then combine them into one. So I'll start with the resin itself here. Now I want to do, let's go 16 grams of resin, so I'm going to do 8 into each cup. Alright, there's 8 grams of resin. Just 8 grams of hardener. so I've got 8 ounces of each. The yellowish colored one, this one right here, that's the hardener, so I'm just going to go ahead and pour that in to my resin. Scrape it out with, I got some of these stirring sticks here that work pretty well. They're super cheap, meant for stirring coffee, but they work pretty well in such a small amount of resin here. So I'm going to go ahead and dump it in, stir it all up, make sure it's mixed as much as possible. I mean, like several minutes of stirring. And then we'll dump it all in with the carbon fiber. But before we do that, actually, I want to do one other thing here. So I also have these screws that I'm going to use to sort of keep my molds sort of centered where they need to go with the holes that are drilled in them. I'm also going to dip these into the wax here to make sure that they're coated well enough that the resin doesn't stick to them as well. Alright, so now my gloves are coated in this wax, so I'm just going to pull these off and put on a new pair. I just don't want the wax to get mixed in with the resin. I want it to be, you know, the chemistry of it, I want it to be exactly correct. This particular brand of resin has about a 30-minute time limit on how long you can work with it. After about 30 minutes, you kind of want it to be set in the location where it needs to be. I think the hardest part is getting all of the excess material inside of the mold. It tries to squish out pretty often. I'll go ahead and let this sit overnight. I think on this other one I'm going to go ahead and try and do it kind of the more traditional way, and that is to paint on the resin onto the block and then put in the carbon fiber chop material. And then soak it with a little bit more resin, which means I probably need to actually mix a little more resin than I did previously just to make sure that it's nice and wet. It seemed like this was a little bit dry, but it kind of has been in all the other parts that I've built as well. This is obviously, I'm just dabbling to see, you know, what needs to be done and what doesn't, so we'll see how this works. Alright, I'm going to start working on number 2 now. It felt like when I was stuffing the material, the entire composite material, meaning carbon fiber and the resin, into the other mold, it just felt like it wasn't very tight in there. So I have a feeling that when I pull this mold apart, it's probably going to have some open cavities inside of there where the carbon fiber and the resin didn't, you know, squish into where it needs to go. So I'm gonna increase the amount that I put into this one. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do 25 grams of carbon fiber and then 20 grams of resin and see if that makes a difference. Hopefully, but my goal is to get it You know, if some of it squishes out the side, that's okay, I can cut it off after the fact, but I want to make sure that I can squish as much as I can into each of the holes between the cavity and the core here. I want to make sure that every single little crevice is filled with it. Even if some squishes out the side, at least I know that there's some pressure pushing it into other places. So here we go. Now the resin that I bought for this, it's not what you would typically use for carbon fiber, but it does work, you know, well. It's actually meant for, you know, you've probably seen people who build those tables that are called waterfall tables, and they're just sort of a resin with different colors and things like that. Sometimes some objects suspended them and that kind of thing. Use this paintbrush here to sort of paint in a layer before I start. Alright, well this one obviously has more material squishing out of it. That definitely makes sense because I you know, added more material, more volume. So it makes a lot of sense that more of it is squishing out, which means I'll have more to cut off, but hopefully also means that it'll fill in every gap and crevice in there a little bit better. So we'll see. I need to let this sit overnight, so 24 hours for this to cure. So I'll come back at it tomorrow and split these the molds in half, and hopefully the part falls right out without any real issue and no damage to the molds. Alright, I've let both of these cure overnight. You can see the little filaments of carbon fiber here. They're pretty stiff, so the looks like the epoxy resin was mixed properly. Everything seems to be pretty tight. So I'm just going to go ahead and separate the two halves and see what happens. So I could put enough wax on these screws. They didn't, I mean, I can pull them out with my fingers, so that's not expected, but good. Gotta be careful on these little chunks of carbon fiber, they're pretty sharp. Well, screwdriver damaged my mold a little bit, but it did pop out pretty well. If you look kind of close at this, you can Start to see some of this PLA or the PVA kind of starting to peel off here in a couple of spots. Got pretty good. There's one little spot back here in the back that didn't quite get compressed in there very well. But this is all the inside, so it doesn't matter as much. The outside is more what we're concerned about, I think. Alright, well, that turned out actually really good. So I think putting a little more of the material in there than the other one. I'll pull that apart in a second here too to look at it, but that turned out actually really nice. Still got some of that PVA stuck to it, so this is something you just run under the faucet and kind of rinse it off. Like I said, it's water soluble, so that'll just kind of peel off. But yeah, it looks pretty good. That one actually came off a little bit easier. Looks like maybe it didn't fill in the gap here as much on this one as the other one again, so I might have to lay this one up a third time. There we go. Yeah, so this one still has some gaps in there that didn't get the material in there. So I think that on my GitHub site there, I'm going to bump the numbers up to what I used on the one that worked out pretty well. I don't remember what that was. I think 20 and 25 grams of each instead of like 14 and 12 or something, whatever the numbers I had in there. This one just didn't quite fill in the gaps as well. Like even this area here, like there's just gaps in between, like where the PVA is there, but it kind of kept a little air bubble in there. But at least I got one good part out of this. I'm going to go ahead and trim around this and you know, drill the holes where they need to be for the lights to fit, and call that a day. Yeah, so a combination of the hacksaw and a file cleans that up nicely. Just got to continue cutting around the rest of this stuff off. The hardest part, I think, is going to be finding out where to put this in the vise so that it will hold without damaging anything. That cleaned up all right. Got to drill these holes. In the model, I went ahead and put little divots there so I knew where to drill. Yeah, just got to actually drill the holes. There's a sort of a indention here. That needs to all be cut out. That's where the wires for the light will pass through. So what I'll do is drill in each of the four corners here with the drill to give it a nice round corner. And then I'll go in and cut it. I think the last time I did it with like a box knife or something to get in there, just kind of slowly cut through it, and then use a file to clean it up afterwards. So I drilled it with a 3/32 to start, number 40 drill bit. Up drilled a number 30, which is the size that I'm using for the screws here. Looks like the sanding around the outside here is mostly just sort of sanding into the PVA that's on the top and not, it's kind of choking up my sand pad here. So I'm going to go in and wash this off in water and then continue. Alright, cleaned off all the PVA, just rinsed it under the water and kind of wiped it off. Gonna go ahead and keep sanding now. Alright, let's see if we can fit the light in. Alright, well, I'm going to call that good. Like I said, I'm just going to let this dry. I actually pulled it out of the mold about 2 hours before the 24-hour period that it suggests. After putting some water on there, it feels a little bit tacky, and I'm not sure if that's the PVA that just didn't get washed off all the way, or if it's actually the resin that's not quite hardened all the way. So I'm actually just going to leave this alone for, I'll pull the light off, but I'm going to leave this alone, the standoff, for, you know, probably another day or so, and just leave it to harden. And then I'll, scuff it up a little bit and put a little clear coat paint on the top just to see how it looks. And might have to do a couple of coats of it with some sanding in between. There's still a couple of little marks here from where my 3D printed mold had some little, you can definitely see it here on the inside. There's a little ridge right here where there's a little bump when it was 3D printing somehow. I'm not sure what happened there, but so there's a few little tiny ridges on the outside here. So we'll give it a couple coats of clear coat, sand them down between coats, and see if we can polish that up and make it look real pretty. All right, that's what the final, I guess, product looks like. I did put a little coat of clear coat on there. Obviously it's got some divots and things. It wasn't a perfect surface when I put it on. Several more coats of that plus some polishing in between will make this shine up really nice. But overall, I'm very happy with that. If you look at the back side over here, I have some nylock nuts on the back side of this, along with a 3D printed little, 45-degree standoff back here so that the screw goes straight. So that's what this will look like on the side of the airplane, with the wingtip leaning at 45 degrees. It puts the light out there vertically, as it should be, or I guess horizontally. And yeah, it looks pretty good. Alright, well, that's going to wrap this one up. Thanks for hanging out with me again for a little bit. If this is your first time, consider subscribing, and we'll see you on the next one. Take it easy.